Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the only Quirk user in a city ruled by Superman. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sun rose over Aegis City not like a natural phenomenon, but like a scheduled event. Its light, filtered through atmospheric purifiers that orbited miles above, struck the crystalline towers at a precise, pre-calculated angle. There was no hazy dawn, no smog-tinted orange. There was only darkness, and then a clean, brilliant, benevolent light that washed over a city sculpted from logic and safety. From his bedroom window, Izuku Midoriya watched the city wake up. It didn't so much wake as activate. Below, whisper-quiet maglev trams began their morning glide along suspended magnetic rails, their movements a synchronized ballet of public transport. Automated street sweepers, silent chrome discs, hummed along the permacrete sidewalks, dutifully vaporizing the few stray leaves that had dared to fall overnight. The air that drifted through his open window was cool and carried the scent of recycled water and the faint, ozonic tang of active technology. It was the scent of perfection. Izuku! Breakfast is ready! His mother's voice called from the kitchen, a warm, human sound in the sterile symphony of the morning. Coming! He called back, tearing his eyes from the window. His room was a shrine to an impossible idea. While other teenagers had posters of pop stars or virtual sports champions, Izuku's walls were covered in a single, recurring image, a stylized, diamond-shaped crest of red and yellow, housing a bold, hopeful S. There were posters of the Man of Steel in various poses, hovering benevolently over the city, arms crossed and smiling, a crimson and blue streak breaking the sound barrier, a powerful silhouette against the sun. But the centerpiece of the room, the object of his true devotion, lay open on his desk. It was a simple, spiral-bound notebook, its cover worn soft with use. Scrawled on the front in marker were the words, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. He ran a finger over the page he'd been working on late last night. It was a complex diagram of the Aegis City Grand Bridge, with trajectory lines and calculated stress points. The notes in the margins were tiny, almost microscopic. Superman, thermal vision application and structural reinforcement. Query, can focused, low-intensity heat vision be used to fuse microfractures in durasteel suspension cables post-seismic event? Standard procedure is manual replacement, 72-hour downtime. Potential for SV, Superman Vision, intervention to reduce downtime to 1 hour. Cross-reference files on Kryptonian energy manipulation versus Earth alloys. He uses wide beam, high intensity for threats. Has he ever demonstrated micro-precision? Possible weakness? No, not a weakness. An unexplored application. He sighed, closing the book. It was a pointless exercise, he knew. A fantasy. In a world with one god, there was no room for acolytes. In the kitchen, his mother, Inko Midoriya, had laid out a simple, nutritious breakfast. She watched him with her usual worried eyes as he sat down. You were up late again, sweetie, she said, placing a glass of nutrient paste, flavored to taste vaguely like orange juice, beside his plate. Another one of your notebooks? Izuku flushed and mumbled. Just some theoretical physics for school. It was a lie they had both come to accept. Inko knew perfectly well what he was doing. She'd seen the dozens of notebooks filled with his frantic, brilliant scrawling. She knew of his singular, all-consuming obsession. And she worried. It wasn't normal for a boy his age to be so fixated on a dream that could never, ever come true. In Aegis City, career paths were clear and sensible: bioengineering, atmospheric science, AI ethics, art curation. Hero wasn't on the list. It was a filled position. A pleasant, resonant voice filled the room, emanating from the small, holographic news emitter on the counter. A miniature, three-dimensional figure of a newscaster stood on the device. And in international news, Superman yesterday averted a catastrophic tsunami off the coast of Japan, altering tidal patterns with a precisely targeted application of Arctic breath. He had this to say in a global address. A new hologram replaced the newscaster, Superman himself. He hovered in the air, radiating an aura of calm, absolute power. His voice was like a warm blanket. Every life is precious. So long as I am here to protect it, this world will know peace. Rest easy. I am watching. The hologram faded. Inko smiled, a genuine, relieved expression that Izuku had seen on the faces of millions. It was the smile of the protected, the saved. Oh, he's just wonderful, she breathed. I don't know what we'd do without him. Izuku said nothing. He stared at the spot where the hologram had been, a familiar ache in his chest. He loved Superman. He revered him. He was the ultimate symbol of everything good and right. But his presence cast a shadow so vast, it blotted out the sky for anyone else who dared to look up and dream of flying. He was the reason Izuku could live in perfect safety, and the reason his own dreams were impossible. Aegis City Unified High School was much like the city itself, clean, efficient, and ruthlessly optimized for success. Students learned from interactive lightboards, their assignments graded by benevolent AIs who offered encouraging, algorithm-driven feedback. There were no fights in the hallways. There was no real strife. There was only a quiet, simmering pressure to conform to the utopian ideal. All right, class, settle down, said Mr. Aizawa, their homeroom teacher. He was a perpetually tired-looking man whose apathy was a strange form of rebellion in a city built on enthusiasm. Your career aptitude forms are due by the end of the week. Most of you have selected sensible paths. I see several in hydroponic agriculture, quantum computing, very practical. Our world needs practical people. His eyes, heavy-lidded and bored, scanned the room before landing, as they so often did, on Izuku. Midoriya, he said, his voice flat. Still planning on filling in hero? A few students snickered. Izuku felt his face burn hot. He sank lower in his chair, staring at the polished surface of his desk. From a few seats away, a sharp, derisive laugh cut through the quiet murmurs. Give it up, Deku, the voice sneered. Izuku didn't have to look to know it was Katsuki Bakugo. In another world, a world of chaos and genetic lottery, Katsuki Bakugo might have been a force of nature, a walking explosion of power and ambition. In this world, he was just exceptional. He was the top student, the star athlete, the apex of what a non-powered human could be. He was handsome, intelligent, and possessed a core of blistering self-confidence that bordered on arrogance. He saw Izuku's obsession not as a dream, but as a delusion, an insult to the perfect world they lived in. Why would anyone need another hero? Bakugo continued, propping his feet on the desk in a rare display of minor rebellion. It's like trying to invent a second sun. The job's taken, you useless nerd. Stop scribbling in those creepy stalker notebooks and pick a real job. Maybe you can be a janitor at the Hall of Justice. The class laughed openly this time. Izuku's hands clenched into fists under his desk, his knuckles white. The word Deku, Bakugo's personal moniker for him, a twisted play on his name that meant useless, stung as much as any physical blow. That's enough, Bakugo, Aizawa said, though without any real force. The sentiment, after all, was one the entire world shared. Midoriya. The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs people who understand their place. Superman handles the impossible. We handle the possible. That is the order of things. The words echoed in Izuku's head for the rest of the day. The order of things. It was a phrase he heard everywhere. It was in the perfectly timed traffic grids, the crime rate statistics that boasted years of zeros, the placid expressions of the citizens who walked the clean streets. Aegis City was a beautiful, intricate clock, and Superman was its mainspring. Every other piece simply had to tick in time. But what if, Izuku thought as he stared out the window during history class, the clock was wrong? What if a perfectly safe, predictable world was also a stagnant one? The history lesson was about the pre-Superman era, a time of chaos they called the Age of Conflict. It was filled with wars, famines, and disasters. Superman's arrival had been a miracle, an end to all that. But it had also been an end to something else. An end to humanity's desperate, scrappy, heroic struggle against its own limitations. He had saved them, but had he also neutered them? The thought was blasphemous. He pushed it away, ashamed. Who was he, a quirkless, powerless teenager, to question the wisdom of a god? After school, he took the long way home, heading toward the downtown sector where the newest, most ambitious construction project was underway, the Helios Tower, a spire designed to reach the edge of the stratosphere and serve as a secondary mooring station for orbital transport. It was a monument to Superman's era of peace and progress. He found a bench in a small, manicured park and pulled out Volume 14. He wanted to analyze the crane logistics. The giant construction arms were marvels of engineering, automated and overseen by a central AI. But even AIs operated on human-written code. There were always variables. A shadow fell over him. Still at it, huh? Izuku flinched, looking up. Bakugo stood there, his school bag slung casually over his shoulder. His expression was one of pitying contempt. What do you want, Kakin? Izuku asked, using his childhood nickname for the boy who had once been his friend. I want to understand what's so broken in your head that you can't accept reality, Bakugo said, kicking lightly at the leg of the bench. Look around you, Deku. It's perfect. There's nothing to save. There are no monsters to fight. He beat them all, decades before we were born. What's your plan? Punch a falling leaf? Rescue a cat from a perfectly safe, self-lowering tree? Heroism isn't just about fighting monsters, Izuku retorted, his voice trembling slightly. It's about helping people. It's about being there when things go wrong. Nothing goes wrong here. Bakugo gestured angrily at the pristine cityscape. The system works. Superman works. End of story. Your obsession is pathetic. You're waiting for a world that doesn't exist anymore. He leaned in closer, his red eyes intense. Let me give you some free advice. Throw those books away. Get a life. Or you'll just be Deku forever. With that, Bakugo turned and walked away, disappearing into the sparse but orderly crowd. Izuku sat there, his shoulders slumped, the weight of Bakugo's words pressing down on him. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was just a useless dreamer, clinging to a childish fantasy. He stared at his notebook, the detailed analysis of Superman's powers seeming, for the first time, truly and utterly pointless. He was so lost in his melancholy that he almost didn't hear it at first. A sound that didn't belong in Aegis City, a high-pitched, metallic shriek. It was a sound of stress, of metal giving way. It was followed by a deep, grinding roar that vibrated through the permacrete under his feet. People in the park stopped, their placid expressions turning to confusion then alarm. The sound was alien, a violation of the city's engineered peace. Izuku was on his feet in an instant, his heart hammering against his ribs. His analyst's mind, the one Bakugo had just mocked, kicked into overdrive, overriding his despair. The sound was coming from the Helios Tower construction site. And it was getting worse. He started running, shoving his notebook into his bag without a second thought. The ingrained, instinctual panic of the crowd was a strange sight. These were people who had never known a real disaster. They milled about, looking up at the sky as if expecting Superman to instantly appear and fix whatever was wrong. On a giant public view screen attached to a nearby building, a news anchor's face appeared, her expression tense. We are getting unconfirmed reports of a major structural failure at the Helios Tower construction site. We are also being told that Superman is currently, yes, we have confirmation. Superman is engaged with an interstellar object on a collision course with the Martian colony. He is off-world and unavailable. A collective gasp went through the crowd. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, settled over them. The safety net was gone. Izuku pushed through the throng, his mind racing faster than his legs. Structural failure. Off-world. No primary intervention. His thoughts were bullet points, just like in his notebooks. He rounded the corner and saw it. Hell had opened up in the heart of Utopia. One of the massive construction cranes, a metal behemoth hundreds of feet tall, had buckled. Its arm, laden with a multi-ton durasteel beam, had snapped and plunged downward. It had sighed through the side of a building and, most critically, had slammed directly onto the elevated maglev track. The very track that, seconds before, had been carrying a passenger tram. The scene was chaos. The front two cars of the sleek, silver tram were crushed, derailed and hanging precariously off the edge of the mangled track 50 feet in the air. The rear cars were still on the intact portion, but sparks showered from the damaged power conduit. Dust, thick and choking, filled the air with the acrid smell of ozone and pulverized concrete. Sirens, the conventional kind from police cruisers and medical drones, began to wail, a sound so rare it felt apocalyptic. First responders were already on the scene, but they were overwhelmed. They were equipped for small-scale emergencies, not a catastrophe of this magnitude. They were setting up safety perimeters, trying to control the panicked crowds, but they could do little for the people trapped in the hanging tram cars. Izuku's eyes scanned the wreckage, his brain automatically deconstructing the disaster. Primary support for track compromised. Torsional stress on remaining structure is critical. The whole section could go. The hanging cars at asymmetrical weight. Risk of secondary collapse is high. Electrical fire from the conduit is a tertiary threat. His gaze swept the ground, the debris field. Twisted metal, shattered glass, plumes of dust. And then he saw him. Pinned beneath a massive, bent I-beam that had been part of the crane's support structure was a figure in a school uniform. He was struggling, trying to push the impossibly heavy weight off his legs. It was Katsuki Bakugo. He must have been walking right past the site when it happened. He was conscious, shouting curses mixed with pained grunts, but he was trapped. Worse, Izuku saw a thin stream of iridescent fluid leaking from a severed power cable nearby, pooling dangerously close to Bakugo's trapped form. It was coolant, but it was highly flammable. The professional first responders were focused on the dangling train. No one had seen him yet. No one was coming for him. Izuku froze. His entire body went cold. This was it. The thing he'd written about, theorized about, dreamed about. A disaster. A person in need. A hero's moment. And he was just Izuku Midoriya. Deku. Useless. What can I do? The thought was a scream in his mind. I'm nothing. I have no power. I'll just get in the way. I'll get myself killed. He saw the first responders trying to set up an inflatable rescue cushion beneath the tram, a process that was agonizingly slow. He saw the sparks from the power line inch closer to the pool of flammable coolant near Bakugo. Time was running out. What would Superman do? The question, his lifelong mantra, echoed in his head. Superman would fly in, lift the beam with one finger, and move on to the next problem. But Izuku wasn't Superman. The realization was a physical blow. He couldn't lift that beam. He couldn't fly. He couldn't do anything. His legs felt rooted to the spot, his body paralyzed by a terror so profound it stole the air from his lungs. He was just a spectator to the tragedy, another helpless face in the crowd. Bakugo was right. He was pathetic. Then, through the haze of dust and fear, he saw Bakugo's face. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. His struggles were weakening. He was trapped, terrified, and about to die. And in that instant, something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was an instinct, a biological imperative that bypassed every rational fear screaming in his brain. His feet were moving before he made a conscious decision to run. Hey! Kid! Get back! A police officer yelled, but Izuku dodged past him, vaulting over a pile of smaller debris. Useless. Can't do anything. Not strong enough. The negative thoughts were still there, but they were a background hum now, drowned out by the frantic pounding of his heart and the singular, desperate focus in his eyes. He wasn't running toward the I-beam. He was running toward a pile of discarded construction materials a few yards away. What would Superman do if he were me? If he only had my body, my brain? The new question was a revelation. Superman wouldn't just try to lift it. He would analyze. He would use his environment. He would find a way. Izuku's eyes locked onto a long, thick piece of rebar, about 10 feet long. A lever. He skidded to a halt beside Bakugo, who stared up at him, his face a mask of shock and pain. Deku? What the hell are you doing? Get out of here, you idiot! Shut up and stay still! Izuku grunted, his voice tight with adrenaline. He was already dragging the heavy rebar, his thin arms straining. He wedged one end under the massive I-beam, shoving it as far as he could. Physics. Basic physics. He remembered a diagram from a textbook. A fulcrum. He needed a fulcrum. His eyes darted around, landing on a solid block of shattered permacrete. It was perfect. He wrestled the block into position beneath the rebar, as close to the I-beam as he could manage. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. He was just a skinny teenager, not a weightlifter. "It's no use, you moron!" Bakugo choked out, coughing as dust filled his lungs. "You can't, it's too heavy. The beam isn't the problem, Kaken," Izuku gasped, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He pointed a trembling finger. "That is," Bakugo followed his gaze and his eyes widened. The sparks from the damaged power line were now just a few feet from the shimmering pool of coolant. Izuku scrambled to the far end of the rebar. He took a deep, shuddering breath, positioning his hands. This was it. He had one chance. He had to put his entire body weight, all of his meager strength, into this one, single motion. Focus. Analyze. Push. He wasn't just pushing down. He was throwing himself down, using gravity as an ally. He let out a raw, guttural scream that was torn from the very core of his being, a sound of pure, desperate effort. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The rebar bowed, groaning under the strain. Then, with a screech of tortured metal, the massive I-beam lifted. It wasn't much. An inch. Maybe 2. But it was enough. "Now, Kaken! Crawl!" Izuku shrieked, his muscles feeling like they were being torn from the bone. Black spots danced in his vision. Bakugo, seeing the sliver of hope, reacted instantly. With a pained roar, he pulled his mangled legs free from under the beam, scrambling backward on his hands and elbows, dragging himself through the dirt and grime. The moment Bakugo was clear, Izuku's strength gave out. He collapsed, his grip on the rebar slipping. The I-beam slammed back down into the dirt with a deafening crash that shook the ground. Crack of whoosh! A spark finally made the leap. The pool of coolant ignited in a brilliant, violent flash of white-hot flame, engulfing the spot where Bakugo had been trapped just seconds before. The wave of heat washed over them, searingly intense. Izuku lay on the ground, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably. His arms felt like noodles. His vision swam. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He pushed himself up, crawling over to Bakugo, who was staring at the fire with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Are you okay?" Izuku asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Bakugo slowly turned his head to look at him. The usual fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by something Izuku had never seen there before, a confusing mixture of shock, confusion, and a sliver of something else. He opened his mouth to say something, but just then, a team of paramedics swarmed them, shouting instructions, checking them for injuries. They were safe. As the paramedics started working on Bakugo's crushed legs, Izuku staggered back, leaning against a piece of stable wreckage. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a shaky, euphoric disbelief. He looked at his hands. They were scraped raw, trembling, and utterly, completely normal. He hadn't needed powers. He had just needed to act. The crowd was being pushed back, but through a gap in the chaos, Izuku saw something that made him freeze. Across the disaster site, partially obscured by the shimmering heat from the fire and the swirling dust, stood a man. He wasn't a first responder or a civilian. He was impossibly thin, almost skeletal, lost inside a baggy, worn-out suit that hung from his frame like a shroud. His face was gaunt, with cheekbones so sharp they looked painful, and his blonde hair was disheveled and thin. He wasn't looking at the dangling tram car. He wasn't looking at the fire or the frantic rescue efforts. He was looking directly at Izuku. Even from this distance, Izuku could feel the intensity of his gaze. It wasn't a look of pity or curiosity. It was a look of profound, piercing evaluation. The man's sunken eyes seemed to see right through him, past the scrawny frame, past the terror and the triumph, and into the very core of his soul, into that foolish, impossible, heroic dream. A racking cough shook the man's frail body, a harsh, wet sound that seemed out of place in the clean air of Aegis City. He pressed a handkerchief to his lips, but his eyes never left Izuku. For a long moment, the world seemed to fall away. There was only the chaos of the disaster and the silent, unwavering stare of the skeletal man. A shiver, completely unrelated to the evening chill, traced its way down Izuku Midoriya's spine. He had just lived through the most terrifying and incredible moment of his life. But he had a sudden, inexplicable feeling that his life was only just beginning. The world outside Izuku Midoriya's window was the same as it had been yesterday. The maglev trams glided with their serene, frictionless grace. The skyline of Aegis City still pierced the heavens, a testament to order and ambition. The soft, ambient hum of a perfectly functioning society was unchanged. But for Izuku, the entire world had been cracked down the middle. He lay in bed, every muscle in his body staging a small, agonizing rebellion. His arms felt like overstretched rubber bands, his back ached with a profound, deep-seated soreness, and his hands, wrapped in sterile medical gauze by his mother, throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. Yet the physical discomfort was a distant echo compared to the roaring tempest in his mind. He had done it. The thoughts circled endlessly, a dizzying, unbelievable refrain. He, Izuku Midoriya, Deku, the useless dreamer, had run into a disaster zone. He had used a piece of rebar and a concrete block to save Kaken's life from a fiery explosion. His mother had been a whirlwind of tearful relief and frantic worry when he'd finally been cleared by the on-site paramedics and sent home. She had fussed over his scraped hands, made him drink 3 glasses of nutrient-replenishing fluid, and hadn't stopped hugging him for nearly 20 minutes, her tears soaking the shoulder of his dusty, torn school uniform. "I was so scared, Izuku. So scared," she'd sobbed. "When I saw the news, that crane, and then the school called to say you were there." "I'm okay, Mom. I'm okay," he had reassured her, his voice hoarse. He hadn't told her the full story. He hadn't mentioned Kaken, or the lever, or the split-second timing. To her, and to the world, he was just another student who had been too close to the accident. The news reports, playing on a low volume in the living room, were calling it the miracle at Helios Plaza. They praised the swift, professional response of the city's emergency services. They showed footage of the rescued tram passengers, their faces pale with shock but overwhelmingly grateful. And they spoke in hushed, reverent tones of the unidentified Samaritan, the mystery hero who had pulled a trapped student from beneath the wreckage moments before an explosion. The only available footage was grainy, shot on a civilian's phone from a distance, showing little more than a frantic, green-haired blur of motion. Katsuki Bakugo, the reports said, was in stable condition at Aegis General Hospital with multiple fractures in both legs. In a brief, televised interview from his hospital bed, he'd been uncharacteristically subdued. When a reporter asked him to identify his rescuer, Bakugo had just stared at the camera, his red eyes filled with a storm of emotions Izuku couldn't begin to decipher, before turning his head away and muttering, "I didn't see him clearly, it was a lie." Izuku knew it. Bakugo had looked right at him. He'd seen the face of the useless Deku performing an act of impossible heroism. The lie was, in its own way, more shocking than the disaster itself. Izuku pushed himself to sit up, hissing as his back muscles protested. He looked at his bandaged hands. They were just hands. Flesh and bone. They hadn't magically developed super strength. He hadn't been imbued with sudden power. It was all him. Just him, his brain, and a desperate, reckless courage he never knew he possessed. And yet, there was that other memory. The final piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. The skeletal man. The image was burned into his memory, the gaunt face, the sunken eyes, the impossibly thin frame lost in a baggy suit. The man hadn't been watching the disaster. He had been watching him. The intensity of that stare had been more unsettling than the falling crane. It felt like being weighed, measured, and judged on a scale he didn't understand. A deep sense of unease settled in his stomach. Who was he? Why had he been there? And why had he looked at Izuku with such piercing focus? The questions chased each other around his head, adding to the exhaustion that permeated his very soul. He felt a desperate need for fresh air, for a space larger than his small room to try and process the cataclysmic shift in his reality. After assuring his mother 100 times that he was just going for a short walk to the local park to clear his head, he slipped on a hoodie and headed out. The cool, clean air of Aegis City did little to soothe him. The perfection felt different now. It felt fragile. He had seen the crack in the facade. He had seen what happens when the one great safety net is pulled away, and for the first time, he understood that the polished surface of their utopia rested on a knife's edge. He found himself wandering toward a small, quiet park a few blocks from his apartment building. It was one of this city's designated reflection zones, with weeping willow-like cybernetic trees whose fiber-optic leaves glowed with a soft, calming light. He sat on a bench overlooking a placid, perfectly circular pond, watching automated chrome ducks glide across its surface. He was alone. The park was deserted at this time of evening. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the city's life support systems. "A remarkable thing you did, young man." The voice was quiet, raspy, and came from directly behind him. Izuku yelped and spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Standing there, shrouded in the soft glow of the cyber trees, was the man, the skeletal man from the disaster site. He looked even more frail up close. His skin was pale and stretched taut over his sharp cheekbones, giving him a skull-like appearance. His blonde hair was thin and fell in two long, unkempt bangs that framed his deeply shadowed eyes. He was leaning heavily on the back of the bench, and Izuku could hear a faint, wheezing sound with every breath he took. Who are you?" Izuku stammered, scrambling to his feet and backing away. "How do you know who I am?" The man offered a weak, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I make it my business to notice things others don't. I was there. I saw you, not the frantic blur on the news, but the boy with the analytical eyes who saw a lever when everyone else saw only an immovable object." He took a shuffling step forward, and a violent, racking cough seized him. He hunched over, pressing a white handkerchief to his mouth. When he pulled it away, Izuku saw, with a jolt of horror, a dark stain of red blooming on the pristine white cloth. "You're hurt," Izuku said, his fear momentarily replaced by a surge of reflexive concern. "You should be at a medical center." The man waved a dismissive, bony hand. "This is an old wound, my boy. The best minds in this city have already done all they can for it. It is, shall we say, a permanent condition." He straightened up, his gaze fixing on Izuku once more. The intensity was back, a burning blue fire in the pits of his hollowed-out sockets. "My name is Toshinori Yagi, and I need to talk to you about your dream." Izuku froze. "My dream? To be a hero," Toshinori said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "In a world that no longer believes it needs them. I watched you run toward danger when every instinct for self-preservation screamed to run away. I watched you save a life not with power, but with courage and intellect. In that moment, I saw a true hero." Izuku's head was spinning. This strange, sick man was speaking his deepest, most secret desire out loud. I don't understand. I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Toshinori said, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the quiet evening. "That is where you are wrong. That is the lie this perfect city has told you. Anyone would not have done that. They would have waited. They would have looked to the sky. They would have waited for Superman. They have been taught to be spectators in their own lives. You, young man, you chose to be a participant." He took another step, and then another, closing the distance between them until he stood directly in front of Izuku. The sheer frailty of the man was unnerving. He looked like a gust of wind could shatter him. "I have been searching for a very long time," Toshinori rasped. "For someone like you. Someone with the spirit of a hero beating in a powerless body. Someone who understands that heroism is not a gift from the stars, but a choice made on the ground." He looked Izuku up and down, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Tell me, young Midoriya, do you still want to be a hero?" The question hung in the air, immense and terrifying. This was the crossroads of his entire life. To say yes to this strange, dying man felt like stepping off a cliff. But to say no would be to betray the very core of his being. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "More than anything." The words were barely a whisper, but in the silence of the park, they seemed to boom like a cannon. Toshinori's tired face broke into a genuine, wide smile. It transformed him. For a fleeting second, the deep lines of pain seemed to vanish, replaced by a radiant, unshakable hope. "I knew it! I knew I was right about you." And then, the impossible happened. "Now watch closely, my boy," Toshinori said, his smile still in place. He took a deep breath. A strange hissing sound, like steam being released from a high-pressure valve, filled the air. And the man began to change. Smoke, or perhaps steam, billowed from his body. His frail, skeletal frame expanded with terrifying speed. His baggy clothes, which had been hanging off him, suddenly grew taut. Shoulders broadened, a chest swelled with impossible muscle, and his height shot up until he towered over Izuku. The gaunt, sickly face filled out, the sharp angles softening into a chiseled jaw and a heroic chin. The thin, lank hair became a vibrant, golden mane, sweeping up into two proud, antenna-like tufts. In the span of 5 seconds, the dying, skeletal man was gone. In his place stood a colossus. A mountain of muscle and charisma, radiating an aura of power so palpable it made the air crackle. He was clad in a brightly colored costume of red, white, and blue, with golden accents on his gauntlets and belt. He planted his fist on his hips and beamed down at Izuku, his teeth gleaming in the soft light of the cyber trees. His smile was a sunrise. "Because I am here!" The man boomed, his voice a force of nature, a thunderous baritone that vibrated in Izuku's very bones. Izuku's brain simply stopped. It crashed. The logical, analytical mind that could deconstruct disasters and theorize about Kryptonian physics met a data point so far outside its parameters that it could only respond with a blue screen of utter, blank-faced shock. Power. Real, tangible, overwhelming power. That wasn't Superman. It was someone else. He recognized the face. Not from life, but from mythology. From the history archives of the pre-Superman era. A symbol from the Age of Conflict. A hero from a bygone time who was rumored to be the last of his kind before Superman's arrival ushered in the New Age. A figure often dismissed as folklore, a comforting legend from a chaotic past. Your. Izuku's voice was a squeak. He pointed a trembling, bandaged finger. All Might? The muscular giant laughed, a sound like a joyous avalanche. In the flesh! Well, for a little while, at least. He placed a hand the size of a dinner plate on Izuku's shoulder, the weight of it both reassuring and terrifying. Izuku's legs finally gave out. He stumbled backward and fell into a sitting position on the manicured grass, his mind a whirlwind of static. But you can't be. All Might he was from before. He's a story, and power. Quirks, they don't exist. Only Superman. The giant figure of All Might seemed to deflate, the steam hissing from him once more. In a matter of seconds he shrank back down into the skeletal, wheezing form of Toshinori Yagi, who coughed weakly into his hand. Not a story, my boy. And as for powers, they are simply very, very rare, Toshinori said, his voice raspy again. He gestured for Izuku to sit back on the bench. Dazed, Izuku complied. That form, that is what I used to be, all the time. Toshinori explained, his voice laced with a deep, profound sadness. But 5 years ago, I fought a battle, a terrible one, fought in the shadows where the man of steel's light does not reach. I won, but it cost me. He lifted his shirt, and Izuku gasped in horror. The left side of Toshinori's torso was a horrific, swirling vortex of scarred tissue. It looked as though something had punched clean through him, and then exploded from the inside. The injury was ancient, puckered, and brutal. The doctor saved my life, but my respiratory system was shredded. I lost my stomach entirely. I can only be All Might for about 3 hours a day now. On a good day, he said, letting the shirt fall, I am a dying ember, young Midoriya. An echo of what I once was. Izuku could only stare, his mind struggling to piece together this new, impossible reality. A battle? Against what? There are no villains. Superman defeated them all. Toshinori's gaze turned towards the gleaming city skyline, his expression hardening. He defeated the public evils. The warlords, the armies, the monsters that announce themselves with fire and fury. But darkness has a way of persisting. It learns. It adapts. It hides in the cracks of even the most perfect society. He turned back to Izuku. But that is a story for another time. I am not here to talk about the past. I am here to talk about the future. Your future. He leaned forward, his sunken eyes burning with conviction. I told you that you were wrong when you said anyone would have done what you did, And I told you that this city teaches its citizens to be spectators. It is time you understood why I believe this. It is time you understood the truth about the gift of Superman. Izuku listened, rapt, as Toshinori began to speak, his voice low and urgent. The man you know as Superman is a good being. Do not ever mistake what I am about to say as an indictment of his character. His heart is pure, his intentions noble. He arrived on this planet and saw a species teetering on the brink of self-destruction, and with his incredible power, he saved us. He ended wars. He stopped famines. He prevented disasters. He gave us peace. He gave us prosperity. He gave us this. Toshinori gestured to the pristine, peaceful park around them. This gilded cage. The phrase hung in the air, sharp and shocking. A cage? Izuku whispered. But we're safe. Exactly, Toshinori affirmed. We are perfectly, utterly, and completely safe. He is our benevolent warden. He protects us from all external threats, and from ourselves. But in doing so, he has performed an unintended, and perhaps unforgivable, act of theft. Toshinori leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He gave us safety, he said, the words heavy with a terrible weight. But he took our future. Izuku recoiled as if struck. What? No! He gave us a future. Look at the city, the technology, the lack of war. He gave us his vision of a future. Toshinori countered, his voice gaining strength. A static, unchanging, predictable future. Think of it like this, my boy. A gardener finds a wild forest, full of struggling saplings fighting for light, of weeds and wonders tangled together, all clawing their way toward the sun. It is messy. It is dangerous, but it is alive, and it is evolving. The gardener, in his wisdom, decides to help. He builds a perfect greenhouse. He provides the exact amount of light, water, and nutrients. He plucks every weed. He ensures no plant has to struggle. And for a time, the garden thrives. It is beautiful. It is perfect. He paused, letting the analogy sink in. But what happens to the plants in that greenhouse? They forget how to fight for the sun. Their roots grow shallow because the soil is always rich. They lose their resilience to blight, their strength to withstand a storm. They become beautiful, perfect, and utterly, hopelessly fragile. They have stopped evolving. They have been domesticated. That, young Midoriya, is what Superman has done to humanity. The idea was a virus, worming its way into Izuku's mind, recontextualizing everything he had ever known. The perfect safety. The lack of crime. The public's utter reliance on their savior. The way his own dream was seen as a pointless delusion. It wasn't just a consequence of peace, it was a symptom of a deeper malaise. My power, Toshinori continued, tapping his own chest. This thing you call the Quirk is named One for All. It is a torch passed down from one generation to the next. It was born in a time of chaos, a power cultivated to stand for the people, by the people. When Superman arrived, the holder of this power at the time, my master, made a difficult choice. She saw his goodness, but she also saw the danger of his absolute power. She feared that he would see any other power as a threat to his new world order, something to be controlled or eliminated. So she hid. One for All became a secret. A seed of humanity's own potential, kept dormant and hidden, waiting for a day when the greenhouse walls might crumble, or when someone remembered the value of the wild forest. Toshinori looked down at his own frail hands. I am the 8th holder. I have carried this torch for 40 years. But my time is running out. My flame is little more than an ember. I have been watching, searching for a worthy successor. Someone to carry the fire forward, to reintroduce that spark of human potential back into this stagnant world. His gaze lifted, and he locked eyes with Izuku. The meaning was unmistakable. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. It felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. Me? He breathed, the word dissolving on his tongue. You want to give me your quirk? Yes, Toshinori said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. I do, but why? I'm nobody. I'm quirkless. I'm Deku. The hated nickname slipped out, a raw admission of his own self-worth. You're all might. You could find anyone. Someone strong, someone smart, someone better. I don't want someone who is already strong, Tashinori said firmly. I want someone who knows what it is to be weak. I don't want someone who is used to winning. I want someone who values a single life enough to risk their own, even with no chance of success. Yesterday, at that disaster site, you were surrounded by people stronger than you. The first responders, the police officers, even Bakugo himself is more physically capable. But you were the only one who acted like a hero. He pointed a finger at Izuku's chest. You ran in because it was the right thing to do. Not because you had a power that made it easy. Your heart is already a hero's heart. The rest is just hardware, and that I can provide. I am not offering you this power so you can fight Superman. I am offering it so you can prove that humanity is still worth believing in. That we can produce our own heroes. He is the answer from the heavens. One for all must be the answer from within. The air crackled with the weight of the moment. Izuku felt like he was standing on the shore of a vast, roaring ocean, and this dying man was inviting him to step in. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, handed to him on a silver platter. The chance to be a hero. The chance to have a quirk. To be like the legend standing before him. But the fear was a cold, coiling serpent in his gut. The responsibility was crushing. To accept this was to accept Tashinori's terrifying worldview. It was to stand in quiet opposition to the perfect, peaceful world he had always known. It was to become an anomaly. A glitch in the system. But what if you're wrong? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. What if Superman is right? What if a power like this, what if I can't control it? What if I hurt someone? The city is safe because of him. If I mess that up, you will, Tashinori said, his bluntness shocking Izuku to silence. You will struggle. You will fail. You will be clumsy, and you will be afraid. This power is a raging sun trapped in your cells. It will try to tear you apart. But your spirit, young Midoriya, the one that ran toward that falling crane, that is what will allow you to tame it. The journey will be hard. But it will be yours. It will be humanity's. Is the potential for failure not worth the possibility of growth? Izuku looked down at his bandaged hands again. He thought of Bakugo's face, the flicker of fear that had been replaced by a reluctant, grudging survival. He thought of his notebooks, filled with the desperate, hopeful analysis of a dream he thought was impossible. He thought of the suffocating, benevolent shadow cast by Superman, and the tiny, rebellious spark within him that had always quietly wondered, what if this was it? The ultimate what if. He took a deep breath, the cool, manufactured air filling his lungs. He looked up, meeting the gaze of the dying hero. He saw the pain there, the exhaustion, but beneath it all, he saw a desperate, pleading hope. A hope that he was placing squarely on Izuku's skinny shoulders. And Izuku knew he could not refuse. To refuse would be to admit that the gilded cage was enough. And he knew, in the deepest part of his soul, that it wasn't. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice clear and steady, imbued with a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. I accept. I'll be your successor. A wave of profound relief washed over Tashinori's face. He seemed to shrink a little further, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from him. Tears welled in his sunken eyes, and he smiled, a genuine, watery smile of pure joy. Thank you, my boy, he whispered. Thank you. He then straightened up, a flicker of his all-might persona returning. Excellent. There is no time to waste. The transfer must be done now. He reached up and, with a grimace, plucked a single strand of his golden hair. He held it out to Izuku between his thumb and forefinger. The single hair seemed to glow with a faint inner light. Izuku stared at it, confused. What am I supposed to do with this? Tashinori grinned, his expression becoming slightly manic. Eat this. Izuku's brain, which had just finished rebooting from the All Might reveal, promptly crashed again. Eat? He shrieked, his voice cracking. You want me to eat your hair? It's the quickest, most efficient way to transfer my DNA containing the essence of one for all into your system. Tashinori explained, waggling the hair impatiently. We can't exactly do a blood transfusion out here in the park, can we? Come on now. Down the hatch. Part of being a hero is doing what needs to be done, no matter how unorthodox. Staring at the single, glowing strand of hair, Izuku felt a moment of profound, absurd clarity. His impossible dream was coming true. His entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt. He was about to inherit a legendary power to challenge the stagnation of a utopian society. And it was all going to start by eating a piece of hair from a skeletal man in a public park. With a deep, shuddering sigh of resignation, Izuku took the hair. He closed his eyes, thought of his dream, and with a supreme effort of will, he swallowed it. It went down with a tickle. For a second, nothing happened. He opened his eyes, looking at Toshinori in confusion. Did it work? I don't feel any. He never finished the sentence. It began as a low hum, deep in his stomach. Then it became a fizz, a spark that shot up his spine and exploded behind his eyes. A universe of pure, untamed energy detonated within his body. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent, cataclysmic birth. He felt 1,000,000,000 volts of lightning course through his veins. He heard the ghost of 1,000 shouts, a chorus of voices from the past, echoing in his skull. He saw flashes of light, of faces he didn't know, of battles he hadn't fought. A raging sun had ignited in his very cells, and his body, a flimsy container made of flesh and bone, was threatening to fly apart. It was pain and power, terror and ecstasy, a feeling so overwhelming it defied description. He collapsed to his knees screaming, though no sound came out. His hands clawed at the grass, his knuckles white. The power of One for All, raw and untamed, was roaring through him, a hurricane searching for an outlet. Toshinori knelt beside him, placing a steadying hand on his back. Breathe, my boy! Just breathe! Anchor it! Don't fight it, accept it! It is a part of you now! It is yours! Izuku focused on the voice, on the hand on his back. He forced air into his lungs, his chest heaving. He didn't try to suppress the power. He opened his mind to it, as Toshinori had said. He accepted the raging sun. Slowly, painstakingly, the storm began to subside. The roaring in his ears faded to a constant, powerful hum. The blinding light behind his eyes softened to a steady, internal glow. He was left kneeling on the grass, trembling and drenched in sweat, but the agonizing torrent had passed. He felt full. A deep, resonant power now resided within him, a sleeping giant in the core of his being. It was terrifying. And it was wonderful. He looked up at Toshinori, his eyes wide with awe. Welcome to your first day of heroism, young Midoriya, the old hero said, a proud smile on his face. It's not going to be easy. You have a long, hard road ahead of you to make that power your own. You will have to work harder than you can possibly imagine. Izuku got to his feet, his legs shaky but firm. He looked out at the gleaming, perfect spires of Aegis City. The view was the same, but his perspective had changed forever. It was no longer a perfect city to be passively admired. It was a challenge. It was a responsibility. It was his training ground. He clenched his fists, the new, immense power humming beneath his skin. For the first time in his life, his impossible dream felt real. The first week of training was not about power. It was about pain. Izuku Midoriya, inheritor of the secret torch of One for All, spent the first 7 days of his new life not punching through walls, but cleaning them. His training ground was not a high-tech simulation chamber, but a cavernous, derelict warehouse in Aegis City's long-forgotten industrial sector, the Rust Belt, as the locals called it. It was a graveyard of pre-Superman industry, a place of corroded steel skeletons and shattered windows that the city's relentless march toward perfection had somehow overlooked. Here, surrounded by the ghosts of human ambition, Toshinori Yagi laid out the brutal, unglamorous truth of his quirk. Your body, the skeletal hero rasped, gesturing with a bony finger at Izuku's trembling form after his 50th push-up, is a glass. One for All is the ocean. If you try to pour the ocean into the glass, it will not just overflow. It will shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. Our first task is not to learn how to pour. It is to turn your glass into a steel chalice. And so, the work began. Every day after school, Izuku would take a circuitous route on the maglev system to the edge of the city, slipping into the Rust Belt like a ghost. There, under Toshinori's watchful, sunken eyes, he ran until his lungs burned with the dusty air. He did push-ups until his arms gave out, sit-ups until his core screamed, and squats until his legs felt like jelly. He hauled rusted girders from one end of the warehouse to the other, the physical act a crude but effective metaphor for the burden he now carried. All the while, the power hummed within him. It was a constant presence, a low-frequency vibration at the base of his spine. It was a sleeping giant, and his meager efforts to strengthen his body felt like trying to build a cage for a kaiju out of toothpicks. Some nights, he would wake up in a cold sweat, his limbs twitching with phantom energy, the echo of the 9 generations of power thrumming just beneath his skin. "You're overthinking it," Toshinori said one afternoon, watching Izuku stare at his own hand as if it were a venomous snake. Izuku had been trying to will a tiny spark of power into his fingertip for nearly an hour, his face scrunched in concentration. "I'm trying to be precise," Izuku argued, frustrated. "My notebooks are full of theories on energy output and kinetic force distribution. If I can just understand the formula, the mechanics of how OFA works—" "Stop!" Toshinori's voice was sharp, cutting through Izuku's rambling. "This is not an equation, young Midoriya. It is not a problem for your mind to solve. It is a force of nature. You don't command a hurricane with mathematics. You learn to feel the wind, to respect its power, and to move with it. You are trying to use your brain to control something that comes from your soul." He gestured around the vast, decaying space. "Why do you think I have you cleaning this dump? Moving this scrap? It's not just to build your muscles. It is to force you out of your head and into your body. Feel the strain in your arms. Feel the ache in your back. Learn the limits of your physical self, so you have a baseline. Only then can you begin to comprehend what it means to go beyond." The words hit Izuku harder than any physical blow. His greatest strength, his analytical mind, was his biggest obstacle. He had spent his life living in a world of theory and observation. Now, he had to learn to simply feel. Weeks bled into a month. His body changed. The soft lines of a sedentary teenager began to harden. Lean muscle, hard-won aching, defined his arms and legs. He could run for miles without gasping for breath, and the girders that had once seemed immovable now felt merely heavy. He was stronger, faster, tougher. But he still hadn't truly used one for all. The frustration was a constant, simmering pressure. He was the successor to All Might, yet all he was doing was manual labor. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he finally snapped. "I can't just keep doing this," he exclaimed, throwing a grimy rag to the floor. "What if something happens? What if there's another disaster like Helios Plaza? I'll have bigger muscles, sure, but I'll still be useless. I need to know what it feels like. I need to try." Toshinori looked at him, his expression a mixture of pity and understanding. He let out a long, wheezing sigh. "You are not ready. Your body is a chalice of iron, perhaps, but not yet of steel. The power will still break you." "I don't care," Izuku insisted, desperation coloring his voice. "I'd rather break my arm trying than do nothing while someone gets hurt. Please, Toshinori-sensei. Let me try. Just once. A small amount." Toshinori studied the fire in the boy's eyes for a long moment. He saw the impatience, the recklessness, but he also saw the heroic spirit that had drawn him to Izuku in the first place. It was a dangerous combination. But perhaps a controlled failure was a necessary part of the curriculum. "Very well," he said, his voice grave. "One attempt. But you will do exactly as I say. Do you understand?" Izuku nodded eagerly, his heart beginning to hammer with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Stand in the center of the warehouse," Toshinori instructed, shuffling a safe distance away. "Now I want you to clear your mind of all your equations and theories. Do not think about percentages or newtons of force. Think of an egg in a microwave." Izuku blinked. An egg? If you pour too much energy in too quickly, what happens? It explodes," Izuku said, a glimmer of understanding dawning. "Precisely," Toshinori affirmed. "You cannot simply dump your power into a limb. It will explode. You must let it flow. Envision the power, that raging sun inside you, flowing through every part of your body at once. Not just your arm. Your legs, your torso, your neck, every muscle fiber, every cell. Don't try to contain it. Let it course through you, like blood through your veins. Become the vessel. Izuku closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He reached inward, not with his mind, but with his feelings, searching for the sleeping giant. He found it, a warm, immense presence coiled in his core. He remembered Tashinori's words. Let it flow. He pictured the energy as water, leaving the vast reservoir in his gut and flowing out into the rivers of his circulatory system. A strange warmth spread through his limbs. Red lines, like crackling veins of lightning, began to trace patterns across his skin, visible even in the dim light of the warehouse. A faint green aura, smelling of ozone and summer storms, began to shimmer around him. The power was rising. It felt incredible. Frightening, but incredible. Good, young Midoriya! Tashinori called out, his voice tense. Now, focus that feeling. The power is flowing through you, not just in you. You are the conduit. Now choose your target. Not to destroy, just to touch. The far wall. Izuku opened his eyes. The world seemed sharper, brighter. He could feel the vibrations of the floor beneath his feet, hear the scuttling of a rat 200 yards away. It was a sensory overload, a symphony of new information. He lifted his right arm, the limb feeling both light as a feather and heavy as an anchor. The green aura intensified around his fist. He remembered watching old footage of All Might, the way he would punch the air to change the weather. The iconic move. The smash. Not to destroy, he reminded himself. Just a touch. An air flick. Like in the notebooks. He drew his arm back, took a stance, and with a guttural scream that was a release of weeks of pent-up frustration, he flicked his finger forward. Delaware smash! He was aiming for a gentle puff of air. A statement. A declaration that he was here. What he got was a tidal wave. The resulting shockwave was not a puff. It was a solid wall of force that erupted from his fingertip. The sound was not a flick. It was a deafening crack boom that was more like a sonic boom than anything else. The air in front of him compressed and exploded outwards, a visible, shimmering distortion that tore through the cavernous space. The force slammed into the far wall of the warehouse, 100 yards away. The corrugated steel didn't just rattle, it buckled and tore like wet paper. But the true devastation was the chain reaction. The shockwave, contained within the enclosed space, bounced off the walls. Every remaining pane of glass in the massive warehouse, hundreds of them, shattered simultaneously in a tinkling, crystalline explosion. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. Rusted gantries swayed violently on their moorings. Izuku was thrown backward by the recoil, landing hard on the concrete floor. His ears were ringing, his vision swimming. He stared at his right arm. It wasn't just broken. It was a catastrophe. His index and middle fingers were bent at sickening, unnatural angles. The entire arm was a swollen, grotesque canvas of deep purple and angry red, the skin stretched taut over the shattered bones within. The pain was a white-hot, blinding agony that eclipsed everything else. He screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure torment. Tashinori was at his side in an instant, his face a mask of grim resignation and worry. He was already pulling a specialized medical kit from his bag, one clearly prepared for this exact eventuality. I told you that you weren't ready, he said softly, as he began to expertly wrap Izuku's mangled arm in a stabilizing brace. You let your excitement, your ambition, take over. You tried to wield the hurricane instead of moving with it. Izuku could only gasp through the waves of pain, tears streaming down his face. I only tried to use a little. There is no little with a son, my boy, Tashinori said, his voice filled with a sad wisdom. There is only on and off. You have not yet learned how to build a dimmer switch. The long, painful trip to a discreet, black market doctor who owed Tashinori a life debt was a blur of agony. The recovery was slow and humbling. For 2 weeks, his arm was a useless, throbbing appendage in a heavy cast, a constant, physical reminder of his failure. The incident solidified a terrifying truth in Izuku's mind. This power was not a gift. It was a sacred duty and a curse. It was a weapon of mass destruction that he was holding by the trigger. A month later, the cast was off, replaced by a supportive brace he could wear under his sleeve. His arm was still stiff, a web of faint scars tracing the path of the internal damage, but it was functional. The training had resumed, but with a new, somber tone. Izuku was more cautious, more respectful of the raging power he carried. He focused on Tashinori's lessons, on the meditative practice of letting the power flow, of trying to build that elusive dimmer switch. He hadn't attempted another smash. The memory of the pain and the sound of 1,000 shattering windows was too fresh. He was heading home late one evening, exhausted from another session of grueling physical conditioning. The maglev hummed quietly, carrying him through the glittering heart of Aegis City. The towers, bathed in the soft, ambient glow of their own lights, looked like a forest of captured stars. It was beautiful, peaceful, and orderly. He disembarked a few stops early, deciding to walk the rest of the way. He needed to feel the city around him, to remind himself what he was training for. He walked through a commercial district, the high-end shops closing for the night. Robotic assistants were polishing the display windows, and the last of the wealthy patrons were being chauffeured away in silent, electric vehicles. It was then that he heard it. A sound that, like the groan of the crane at Helios Plaza, did not belong. A harsh, electronic crackle, followed by a muffled shout and the sound of shattering glass, this time, much closer. His blood ran cold. He flattened himself against the wall of an alleyway, peering around the corner. Down the street, two figures were silhouetted against the bright lights of a luxury jewelry store. The store's reinforced plasteel window had a large, smoking hole in it. The men were dressed in dark, utilitarian clothing, their faces obscured by metallic masks that shimmered with some kind of low-grade optical camouflage. One was holding a bulky, rifle-like device, a black market plasma cutter, Izuku's analytical mind supplied instantly. The other was shoving trays of glittering gems into a duffel bag. A security guard, a middle-aged man in a crisp uniform, lay groaning on the ground near the entrance, clutching his shoulder. He hadn't been shot, but he'd clearly been hit with some kind of stun blast. Robbery. Armed. One civilian injured, Izuku's brain catalogued, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His first instinct, the ingrained response of a citizen of Aegis City, was to reach for his phone, to tap the emergency icon that would alert the Aegis PD and, by extension, Superman's network. The response would be here in under 3 minutes. Fast. Efficient. The correct, sensible thing to do. He had his phone halfway out of his pocket when Tashinori's words echoed in his head. They have been taught to be spectators in their own lives. The world doesn't need more heroes. It needs people who understand their place. He looked at the injured guard. He looked at the robbers, who were now grabbing the last of the merchandise, ready to flee. 3 minutes might be too long. They would be gone. The guard needed help now. This wasn't a falling crane. This wasn't a test. This was real. These were bad people hurting someone. And he, Izuku Midoriya, had a sun burning in his veins. No. Not yet. I'll break myself again. I'll make it worse. The fear was a coiling, venomous snake in his gut. The memory of his shattered arm flared, a phantom pain that made him flinch. But then he looked at the guard again, who was trying to push himself up, to do his duty even while injured. That small, futile act of courage resonated with Izuku, striking a chord deep within him. The dimmer switch. The thought was a lightning strike. He wasn't All Might. He couldn't unleash a hurricane. But maybe he could light a candle. He made a decision. His phone went back into his pocket. He took a deep, shuddering breath and slipped deeper into the shadows of the alley. Don't think. Feel. Flow, not flood. An egg in a microwave. He closed his eyes and reached for one for all. This time, he didn't try to grasp the whole sun. He pictured it as a single, tiny ember. He visualized that ember, that small spark, traveling from his core, down his leg, and pooling in the sole of his right shoe. He focused all his will on that single point. Just 5%. A gentle push, enough to make a difference, not a disaster. Green lightning, faint and delicate this time, crackled around his leg. The power felt different. It wasn't a raging torrent, it was a controlled current. It was working. He burst from the alley. Hey! He yelled, his voice cracking slightly but filled with newfound authority. The two robbers spun around, startled. Their camouflaged masks flickered, revealing surprised, angry faces. The one with the plasma cutter leveled it at Izuku. "Get lost, kid, or you're next! Leave him alone!" Izuku said, planting his feet. He could feel the power thrumming in his leg, ready. His plan was simple: use a small burst of power to leap over them, land behind them, and use the element of surprise to disarm them. Controlled. Precise. He channeled the 5%. Full call. He whispered the name of the technique he had only ever dreamed of. He pushed off. He had aimed for 5%. But the adrenaline, the fear, the desperate need to act, it was like pouring gasoline on the ember. The power surged, hijacking his intent. What should have been a controlled leap became an explosion. Instead of a graceful arc, he launched himself forward like a cannonball. The ground beneath his foot didn't just push back, it fractured. A spider web of cracks erupted from the point of impact on the pristine permacrete sidewalk. He shot past the robbers in a green blur, his speed far greater than he had anticipated. He didn't leap over them, he shot past them. The air displaced by his passage was a mini shockwave in itself, slamming into the two men and sending them staggering. Izuku, completely out of control, slammed into the street beyond them. His landing wasn't a landing, it was a crash. He hit the ground with enough force to send another, larger network of cracks across the asphalt. He tumbled, rolling head over heels before skidding to a stop 20 feet away, his clothes torn and his body screaming from the impact. He'd failed. He'd overshot it completely. But as he pushed himself up, groaning, he saw the unintended consequence of his failure. The shockwave from his initial leap had not only knocked the robbers off balance, but the larger one had also thrown the one with the weapon into a municipal power transformer mounted on a nearby pole. There was a shower of brilliant blue sparks, a loud, explosive vzzzzzzt crack, and the entire block was plunged into darkness as the transformer blew. The streetlights died. The glowing shop signs went dark. The only light came from the moon and the distant, ever-present glow of the city's core. The robbers were down. One was unconscious from hitting the transformer. The other, disoriented and panicked by the sudden darkness and the sheer, inexplicable violence of what had just happened, scrambled to his feet and fled into the night, leaving the duffel bag behind. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the hum of the dying transformer and the pained groans of the security guard. Izuku had done it. He had saved the day, and he had caused a power outage, cracked a city street in 2 places, and terrified a civilian. It was the messiest, most chaotic, most destructive rescue in the history of Aegis City. It was the antithesis of everything Superman's reign stood for: clean, efficient, perfect intervention. Panic seized him. He couldn't be here. He couldn't be found. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder from the landing, and sprinted away, disappearing into the darkness just as the first distant wail of sirens began to echo through the night. Miles above the earth, in a place of cold, silent majesty, the fortress of solitude floated in the blackness of space, tethered to the planet by unseen forces. It was not a fortress of stone and ice, but of pure, crystalline thought and Kryptonian science. Inside, all was quiet. The only sound was the faint, harmonic hum of systems monitoring 1,000 different metrics across the planet. Vast, semi-transparent holographic displays drifted through the air, showing weather patterns, seismic activity, solar flare projections, and the intricate life support grid of Aegis City. Superman hovered in the center of the main chamber, his eyes closed in a state of meditative awareness. He was listening. Not just with his ears, but with his entire being. He heard the prayers of the faithful, the laughter of children in parks, the gentle rhythm of a city at peace. For decades, this symphony of tranquility had been the reward for his tireless vigil. Then, a new sound entered the symphony. A discord. A single, piercing chime cut through the chamber's quiet hum. It was an alarm he had not heard in over 50 years. It wasn't the alert for a meteor, a volcano, or a tidal wave. It was the anomaly alert, a notification triggered by the appearance of a concentrated, non-Kryptonian, high-energy event within a designated safe zone. His eyes snapped open. On the central display, a red icon blinked over a downtown district of Aegis City. A stream of data flowed beside it, utterly alien. Energy signature, unclassified. Source, biological, dynamic. Output, 7.8 zetajoules, peak kinetic. Collateral damage, significant. Structural, surface, infrastructure, electrical. Superman's expression, usually one of serene benevolence, hardened into one of deep, serious concern. He had spent a lifetime eradicating such unpredictable variables. He had fought beings who could shatter worlds with a thought, whose very existence was a threat to cosmic stability. He had brought order to this world at great cost, ensuring that power of that magnitude was wielded by only one person, himself. Someone he could trust. He zoomed in the satellite view, the crystalline lenses of his fortress focusing on the chaotic scene below. He saw the cracked pavement. He saw the smoking, overloaded transformer. He saw the first responders arriving, their flashing lights painting the scene in strobes of red and blue. He rewound the chronological data feed, observing the event in microseconds slow motion. He saw the two robbers. He saw the security guard. And he saw the blur, a streak of green and black, moving with impossible, uncontrolled speed. The system struggled to resolve the image, but it captured enough. A boy. In a school uniform. With wild green hair. With a thought, he cross-referenced the visual data with other recent anomalies. The system immediately flagged a match, grainy footage from the Helios Plaza collapse. The same green-haired blur, seen near the site of another improbable, chaotic rescue. A new data file opened in front of him, creating a profile for this unknown subject. Subject, unidentified. Designation, Anomaly 001. He zoomed in further, pushing the fortress's optical capabilities to their limit, catching the last few frames of the boy fleeing into the shadows. For a fraction of a second, he got a clear look at the boy's face. It was young, terrified, and radiating a faint, residual aura of green energy. Superman hovered there in the silent cold of his sanctuary, the red light of the anomaly alert reflected in his deep blue eyes. This wasn't the calculated evil of a Zod or a Brainiac. This was something else, something raw, chaotic, and born of Earth. He had built a perfect garden, a world safe from the blight of uncontrolled power. And now, against all odds, a single, wild, and dangerously potent weed had just sprouted through the pristine concrete. His expression was not one of anger. It was something far heavier. It was the look of a god burdened by a terrible, ancient knowledge, contemplating a problem he thought he had solved forever. A problem that had destroyed other worlds, other species. A new power, uncontrolled, unaccounted for, unacceptable. The 2 days following the disastrous, chaotic, and secretly successful intervention at the jewelry store were a special kind of hell for Izuku Midoriya. He existed in a state of suspended terror, a prisoner in his own home, convinced that every shadow in the corner of his eye was a harbinger of his doom. Sleep offered no escape, his dreams a frantic kaleidoscope of cracking pavement, shattering glass, and the disappointed faces of his parents, his teachers, and 1,000 other citizens of Aegis City. He devoured the news with a morbid, self-flagellating obsession. The reports were clinical, detached. They spoke of a localized power disruption in the commercial sector caused by a criminal-induced system overload. They mentioned the foiled robbery and the recovery of the stolen goods. There was no mention of a green blur, no speculation about a new powered individual. The official narrative was neat, tidy, and completely devoid of the chaotic truth he knew. It was as if the city's immune system had already walled off the infection, explaining it away with mundane, acceptable logic. This, somehow, was worse. His existence, his power, was so alien to this world that it couldn't even be properly reported. It was an error message, a piece of corrupted data that the system simply chose to ignore. He sat at his desk, staring at the posters of Superman that adorned his walls. They felt different now. Accusatory. The benevolent smile seemed to carry a hint of disappointment. The powerful stance felt like a silent judgment. For his entire life, Izuku had worshipped this man as the pinnacle of heroism. He had filled 14 notebooks deconstructing his methods, his ethics, his flawless execution. His own actions, clumsy, destructive, reckless, felt like a blasphemy against everything his idol stood for. "I failed," he whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at his hands, no longer bandaged but still aching with a phantom memory of being broken. He had failed Toshinori's first lesson. He had let the power surge, let the situation control him. He had won, but he had won ugly. In Superman City, an ugly win was just a different kind of loss. Izuku? His mother's voice from the doorway made him jump, a jolt of pure adrenaline that sent a faint, dangerous hum of one for all through his veins. He clamped down on it instantly, his heart hammering. Inko stood there, a plate of perfectly synthesized protein cubes arranged in a smiley face. Her expression was one of gentle concern. "You've been so quiet the last couple of days, sweetie. Is everything all right at school?" "Yeah. Fine," he mumbled, trying to force a smile. "Just tired. Studying a lot." She wasn't convinced. She walked over and placed a hand on his forehead, her touch warm and familiar. "You don't have a fever. You just seem tense. You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" He felt a fresh wave of guilt. How could he ever explain? "Mom, a skeletal man who is secretly a legendary hero gave me his superpower, and I'm trying to reintroduce the dangerous concept of human potential into a global utopia. But I keep breaking things." The thought was so absurd it was almost hysterical. "I know, Mom. I'm okay, I promise," he said, the lie heavy on his tongue. She sighed, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze before leaving him to his meal. He stared at the protein cubes, his appetite gone. The weight of his secret was a physical thing, a stone in his gut. That evening, a storm rolled in. This was a rare event. Aegis City's atmospheric regulators usually dissipated such weather fronts long before they reached the metropolitan area, ensuring a climate of perpetual mildness. But this storm was different. It was aggressive, unpredicted. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and a low, guttural thunder rumbled in the distance. The city's lights seemed to shine a little brighter, a little more defiantly, against the encroaching darkness. Izuku stood at his window, watching the rain begin to fall, tracing clean, perfect lines down the synth glass. The storm felt like a reflection of the turmoil inside him. A disruption in the perfect system. Then he heard it. It wasn't the thunder. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound that seemed to exist on a different frequency, a subtle shift in the air pressure, a soft, high-pitched hum that made the fillings in his teeth ache, and the hairs on his arms stand up. It was a sound he felt more than heard, a vibration that resonated with the dormant power of one for all within him. The Quirk was reacting, like a compass needle swinging wildly as it neared a massive magnetic pole. The sound was coming from outside. From above, a primal, instinctual fear, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, what that sound was. He had to see. He had to be sure. "Mom, I'm going up to the roof," he called out, his voice tight. "I want to watch the storm." "Izuku, it's dangerous. Come back inside," her voice called after him, but he was already out the door, sprinting for the stairwell to the roof access. He burst onto the rooftop of his apartment building, the wind and rain hitting him like a physical blow, plastering his green hair to his forehead. The roof was a flat expanse of weatherproof material, dotted with communication arrays and atmospheric sensors. The city spread out below him, a breathtaking panorama of light and geometry, now veiled in sheets of rain. And he was not alone. There, in the center of the roof, stood a figure. The rain did not seem to touch him, forming an invisible, intangible shield a few inches from his body. He was turned away from Izuku, looking out over the city, his broad shoulders and the proud set of his head a silhouette against the stormy skyline. A dark blue suit, a flowing red cape that moved with a life of its own in the wind. The iconic S shield was a beacon of impossible color in the gloom. Superman. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. His legs felt weak, his knees threatening to buckle. The power of One for All, which had been a low hum, was now a screaming siren in his soul, reacting to the sheer, overwhelming presence of the being before him. This wasn't a poster. This wasn't a hologram on the news. This was real. A god was standing on his roof. Slowly, as if sensing his presence without needing to see, Superman turned. His movements were fluid, economical, and radiated an aura of absolute calm. His face was exactly as it was in the news reports, but infinitely more real. The chiseled jaw, the kind eyes, the single, perfect lock of black hair that curled onto his forehead. He wasn't smiling. His expression was one of profound, thoughtful seriousness. "Izuku Midoriya," he said. His voice was not the warm, booming baritone from the public addresses. It was quieter, more personal, yet it carried over the howl of the wind as if the storm itself had paused to listen. It was a voice that held the quiet authority of a mountain, a voice that did not need to be raised to command the attention of the universe. Izuku couldn't speak. His throat was constricted, his mind a white out of panic. "He knows my name. He knows my name. He knows my name." The phrase was a frantic, terrified drumbeat in his head. Superman took a single, effortless step toward him. "It's all right, son. I'm not here to harm you." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze piercing, analytical. "But we do need to talk about the energy signature you emitted 2 nights ago. And about the one at Helios Plaza before that." Every word was a nail in the coffin of Izuku's secret. He had been so careful, so paranoid, but he had been a child trying to hide from the sun. I don't," Izuku stammered, the lie dying before it could even form. There was no point in lying to a being who could probably hear the frantic, dishonest rhythm of his heart. "Let's not start with falsehoods," Superman said, his tone gentle but firm, the voice of a patient father disappointed in his son's choices. "I know it was you. My city is an intricate system. I am its administrator. Every watt of power, every decibel of sound, every vibration is accounted for. You, Izuku, are a variable I cannot account for, and in a system as finely balanced as this one, unaccounted for variables are dangerous." He hovered an inch off the ground, the effortless act of levitation a more profound display of power than any feat of strength. He drifted closer, the rain continuing to part around him, leaving him perfectly dry in the heart of the downpour. "I'm not angry," he continued, his blue eyes searching Izuku's face. "I am concerned. Where did you get this power, son? I have scanned this entire planet, down to its very core. There are no other sources of this kind of bioenergy. It shouldn't exist." Izuku's mind raced, his fear warring with the ingrained warnings from Toshinori. He will see any other power as a threat to be controlled, or eliminated. He had to protect his master. He had to protect the secret of One for All. I don't know," Izuku managed, his voice a raw whisper. "It just happened. At the crane accident. I was scared, and it just came out." It was a partial truth, the best he could manage. Superman's expression didn't change, but Izuku could feel the weight of his disbelief. "A spontaneous manifestation. Unprecedented. And incredibly volatile. The energy you released 2 nights ago was enough to power this entire city block for a year. You were lucky you only blew a single transformer and cracked the street. A slightly different application, a fraction more power, and you could have leveled the entire district. You could have killed hundreds. You could have killed yourself." The calm, factual recitation of his failure was more damning than any angry shout. Izuku flinched, shame washing over him. "I was trying to help," he said weakly. "The guard, he was hurt. The robbers, I know," Superman said, and for the first time, a flicker of something like sympathy entered his eyes. "Your intentions were noble. I have seen the records. You have the instincts of a protector. In another time, another world, that would have made you a hero." He paused, the unspoken but hanging heavy in the air between them. "In this world, it makes you a liability." He came to a stop just a few feet from Izuku. The sheer proximity to him was overwhelming. Izuku could feel a subtle warmth radiating from him, could see the universe reflected in the deep, ancient blue of his eyes. "I want to help you, Izuku," Superman said, his voice dropping to an intimate, persuasive tone. "This power, this Quirk, it is like a loaded weapon in the hands of a child with the best of intentions, but a child nonetheless. You cannot hope to understand or control it on your own. But I can help." He gestured vaguely toward the stormy heavens. "I have a place. A sanctuary far from here. It is a repository of Kryptonian science and knowledge that far surpasses anything on this planet. We could study this power together. We could map its energy patterns, understand its source, and learn its limits. I can teach you control you could never achieve on your own. I can give you a safe environment to practice, where you can't hurt anyone. I can help you contain it. The offer was seductive. It was a promise of knowledge, of safety, of guidance from the greatest hero the world had ever known. A part of Izuku, the part that was still a terrified boy with a broken arm and a power he couldn't control, screamed to say yes. To let this god take the terrible burden from his shoulders. To be safe. But Tashinori's words rose up to meet the temptation, a bulwark against the tide. He gave us safety, but he took our future. A gilded cage. He will see any other power as a threat to be contained. The word hung in the air, echoing Superman's last sentence. Contain. It wasn't about teaching. It was about managing. It wasn't about empowering. It was about controlling. Tashinori had predicted this exact conversation, this exact offer. Izuku took a shaky breath, the cold rain on his face grounding him. He had to refuse. He had accepted the torch from a dying man. He couldn't let that flame be snuffed out in a sterile, alien laboratory. No, he said. The single word, quiet but firm, seemed to strike the man of steel with more force than a physical blow. Superman's calm expression faltered for the barest fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features. He was not accustomed to being refused. No, he repeated, as if the word itself was a foreign concept. Izuku's courage, fragile as it was, began to build on that one small act of defiance. He lifted his chin, meeting the god's gaze. No, thank you, sir. I appreciate the offer. It's more than I deserve, but I can't. Can't? Or won't? Superman's voice lost a fraction of its warmth, replaced by a cool, analytical edge. This power. Izuku struggled to articulate the massive, philosophical concept Tashinori had given him. It didn't just happen to me. It happened for me. For us. It's not alien. It's human. The statement was bold, and he felt the truth of it even as he said it. One for all was a culmination of human will, passed from one to another. It was the ultimate expression of humanity's potential. It's my responsibility. Izuku continued, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. The fact that I can't control it yet, that's my fault. I need to learn. I need to get stronger. I need to fail and get back up. If I just hand it over to you to manage, then what's the point? It wouldn't be mine anymore. It wouldn't be human potential. It would just be another one of your tools. The word hung in the air, more audacious than the refusal itself. For a long moment, Superman was silent. The only sounds were the wind and the rain and the frantic beating of Izuku's own heart. The paternal warmth in Superman's eyes had vanished completely now, replaced by a deep, profound sorrow. It was the look of a wise, ancient being watching a lesser creature make a tragic, predictable mistake. You see this as a test of your character, Superman said, his voice laced with a heavy sadness. A chance for growth. A hero's journey. I understand. It is a story your species has told itself for millennia. He drifted back a step, his gaze sweeping over the glittering city below them. But I am older than your stories, child. I have seen other worlds. I have watched civilizations rise and fall, and I have seen what happens when power like this is left unchecked. His eyes came back to Izuku, and they were filled with the chilling light of terrible memories. I have seen worlds burn because of one individual's right to learn. I have seen galaxies silenced by a single being's potential for growth. You look at your power, and you see a gift. A chance. I look at it, and I see a spark in a field of dry grass. I see a single cell of a cancer that, if allowed to metastasize, could consume everything. He was no longer a paternal figure. He was a judge. A guardian of a cosmic, unforgiving order. Your distinction between human and alien power is a product of sentiment, not logic, Superman stated, his voice flat and absolute. Power is power. Its source is irrelevant. Only its application and its control matter. My power is absolute, but it is also under absolute control. It is a known quantity. A constant. Yours is a chaotic variable. It makes you the single greatest threat to the peace I have spent a century building. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. The single greatest threat. He, Izuku Midoriya, who had worshipped this man, was now being labeled his antithesis. So you are giving me a choice? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. I am giving you a warning. Superman corrected him, his voice devoid of all emotion now. It was the voice of pure, dispassionate logic. Your refusal to accept my help is noted. I will not force you. This world values its illusion of free will, and I will not be the one to shatter it. But my primary directive is the safety and stability of this planet. Of this city. That directive supersedes your desire for a personal journey. He floated closer one last time, his presence immense and oppressive. Consider this your one and only warning. Any further uncontrolled displays of power, any more cracked streets, any more blown transformers, any action that results in collateral damage or puts a single civilian at risk, will be interpreted as a hostile act. And I will respond not as a concerned mentor, but as a guardian neutralizing a threat to his people. Do you understand me, Izuku Midoriya? There was no room for debate. It was an ultimatum, delivered with the finality of a law of physics. Izuku could only nod, his body numb. I understand. Good, Superman said. He gave Izuku one last, long look, a look of profound disappointment and grim resolve. Then, with a gesture that seemed both paternal and deeply condescending, he reached out and placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was light, almost fleeting, and it lasted only a second. Be smart, son. Don't make me do something we will both regret. And then he was gone. There was no sound. No rush of wind. The space where he had been was simply empty. The pressure in the air vanished. The hum in Izuku's soul quieted. The storm, which had held its breath, roared back to life. He was alone on the rooftop again, drenched and shivering, the weight of the gods' ultimatum pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. He stood there for a long time, the rain washing over him, before he finally stumbled back toward the door. As he walked, he rubbed his shoulder where the hero had touched him. There was a strange, faint warmth on the spot, a barely perceptible tingle that he dismissed as a lingering trace of nerves and the raw energy of the encounter. He didn't notice the microscopic object, no larger than a grain of dust and crafted from an alloy that did not exist on Earth, that had adhered to the fabric of his school uniform. It was already calibrating itself to his unique biological energy signature, its purpose simple and absolute, to broadcast his location and power levels, in real time, to a silent, watching sanctuary hidden in the cold, dark vacuum of space. In the Fortress of Solitude, the red anomaly alert faded from the main screen, replaced by a new, persistent display. It was a map of Aegis City, with a single, pulsing green dot moving through the apartment complex on the screen. Beside it, a complex waveform graph charted the ebb and flow of Izuku's internal energy. Subject, Anomaly 001. Name, Izuku Midoriya. Status, monitored. Tracking beacon, online. Signal, strong. Superman hovered in the center of his sanctuary, his back to the holographic display of Earth. His face was grim, his eyes closed. He had offered the child a shepherd. The child had chosen to be a wolf, a dangerous, unpredictable wolf in a flock of carefully tended sheep. He had not wanted this. He had hoped for compliance, for a peaceful resolution. He had hoped the boy would see reason, would understand the magnitude of the danger he represented. But the boy was blinded by human ideals, by pride, by a foolish, romantic notion of self-determination. Ideals that Superman had seen lead countless other species to ruin. He had given his warning. He had drawn his line in the sand. Now, he would watch. And he would wait. And when the boy inevitably stumbled, when his chaotic power inevitably hurt someone, Superman would be there to end it. Swiftly, cleanly, and with deep, profound regret. It was, after all, his responsibility.